We live in an age of ghosts and whispers. The money in our bank accounts isn't really there. It's just a number on a screen, a promise. The wealth we work for can be diluted by a single keystroke in a central bank halfway around the world. And the largest, most powerful force shaping our lives is something most of us barely think about: debt. But here's the unsettling truth. Ancient empires, the ones we read about in history books, understood the dangerous nature of debt far better than we do today. They knew it wasn't just an accounting entry. It was a tool of power, a social contract, and a potential trigger for collapse. This isn't just another video about numbers. This is about the greatest financial experiment in human history, and you and I are living inside of it. Global debt, from governments to households, has soared to levels no civilization has ever managed to carry. We've normalized it. We talk about trillion-dollar deficits as if they were inevitable, and we sign up for 30-year mortgages as casually as we order a coffee. We've been taught to see debt as a normal, even harmless part of modern life. But history tells a very different and much darker story. Debt has always been a weapon of control, a source of instability, and a ticking time bomb waiting for the right spark. The real question isn't if this mountain of global debt will cause a crisis, but when it will happen and who will be forced to pay the price when the system finally resets. To understand our precarious situation, we need to look back, not just decades, but millennia, to the very origins of debt itself. In this video, we're going to uncover the hidden story of debt. I promise to show you a simple, historically proven pattern that financial experts and political analysts use to predict economic turmoil. It's a secret that shifts our understanding of debt from a personal problem to a systemic trap. We are going to explore the ancient secret, what early civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt knew about debt that our modern leaders have conveniently forgotten, the geopolitics of IOUS, how debt evolved from a simple ledger into the primary tool for funding wars, building empires, and toppling dynasties. The quiet revolution of 1971, the single moment that untethered our financial system from reality and unleashed the infinite creation of debt. The illusion of safety, how the modern financial system is designed to rescue the powerful and leave ordinary people with the bill, and what modern research tells us about who truly benefits. The three inevitable endings. We'll look at the only three ways massive debt cycles have ever ended in history, and what you can do to prepare for the one that's likely coming. So let's begin by traveling back in time to the very first cities where the story of debt was first written not in ink, but in clay. The story of debt is the story of civilization itself. The very first examples of human writing, the ancient clay tablets from Mesopotamia dating back 5,000 years, weren't epic poems or philosophical treatises. They were ledgers, simple, stark records of who owed what to whom, how many bushels of grain, how many head of livestock. In these early societies, debt wasn't just a business transaction. It was a sacred moral obligation. It was overseen by priests and kings, and its rules were woven into the fabric of social and religious life. But these ancient rulers understood something profound that we've lost sight of. They knew that while debt was a useful tool for organizing society, too much of it was poison. When debts grew too large, when too many farmers were forced to pledge their land, their tools, or even their family members as collateral, society itself began to fray. This is why many ancient cultures, including the Babylonians under Hammurabi, instituted periodic clean slates, or jubilees. These were society-wide debt cancellations, decreed by the king to prevent a full-blown social collapse. Think about that for a moment. The survival of their civilization depended on hitting a financial reset button. They understood that you could not enslave an entire population with obligations forever. At some point, the system breaks. This isn't just ancient history. Modern anthropologist David Graeber, in his seminal book, Debt: The First 5,000 Years, argues that our modern transactional view of debt is an anomaly. For most of human history, finance was deeply embedded in human relationships. In many traditional cultures, like those found in parts of Southeast Asia or Africa, the idea of charging interest to a neighbor was unthinkable because it would destroy the communal bonds that ensured everyone's survival. Your neighbor's well-being was your well-being. Today, our financial system operates on the opposite principle: anonymous, interest-bearing debt, where the lender has no connection to the borrower beyond a spreadsheet. This detachment allows the system to grow to an inhuman scale. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and we see debt evolving. The great banking families like the Medici and Florence transformed debt from a local obligation into a global instrument. They weren't just lending grain, they were dealing in gold, credit, and political power. Kings and popes came to them to borrow enormous sums to fund their ambitions, to wage wars, build magnificent cathedrals, and finance expeditions to new worlds. But even then, the core risk remained. Spain, which became the world's first global superpower after being flooded with silver from the Americas, declared bankruptcy 4 times in the 16th century alone. Why? Because the crown's ambition consistently outpaced its reality. They borrowed more than they could ever hope to repay, even with mountains of gold. This teaches us a timeless lesson. Even the richest empires can drown in debt. It was no longer just a personal problem. Debt had become geopolitical. It fueled conflicts, decided the fate of dynasties, and redrew the maps of the world. And that trend would only accelerate, leading us directly into the chaos of the 20th century. The modern explosion of debt, however, truly began in the fires of the 20th century. After the First World War, the victorious nations saddled Germany with reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. The obligations were so enormous, so crushing, that one of the most brilliant economic minds of the time, John Maynard Keynes, warned that it was an act of economic insanity. He argued that forcing a nation into a debt it could never possibly repay would not bring peace, but would instead plant the seeds for future chaos. He was tragically right. The German hyperinflation of the early 1920s was the direct result. It's an event we often see in black and white photos, people with wheelbarrows full of worthless paper money to buy a loaf of bread. But we need to feel the human reality behind those images. This wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a psychological one. It was the complete evaporation of trust. Your life savings, the reward for a lifetime of hard work, could become meaningless overnight. The very glue of society, the belief that a mark was worth a mark, dissolved. This national trauma left scars so deep that it shaped the political extremism that led directly to the Second World War. Debt, when pushed to its limits, doesn't just cause spreadsheets to go red, it unravels the very fabric of society. From the ashes of that second global conflict, world leaders gathered in 1944 at a resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal was ambitious: to engineer a new global financial system that would prevent this kind of chaos from ever happening again. They attempted to put the ghost of infinite debt back in the bottle. The United States, which then held 2/3 of the world's gold, would be the anchor. The US dollar was made convertible to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce, and all other major currencies were pegged to the dollar. The idea was to create stability, predictability, and discipline. The reality, as we now know, was dependence. For a while, the system worked. It ushered in an era of unprecedented prosperity, helping to fuel the economic miracle in post-war Japan and the Wirtschaftswunder in West Germany. But it contained a fatal flaw. By making the dollar the world's reserve currency, the system gave the United States what French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing later called an exorbitant privilege. The U.S. could buy whatever it wanted from the rest of the world simply by printing paper, while other countries had to produce actual goods and services to earn those same dollars. And the universal temptation to spend more than you earn never goes away. By the 1960s, the costs of the Vietnam War and ambitious domestic social programs began to pile up. The U.S. government did what every government is tempted to do. It printed more money. More dollars were flowing out into the world than could possibly be backed by the gold sitting in Fort Knox. Other countries, particularly France, noticed this. They began to question the promise and started asking for their gold back in exchange for the paper dollars they held. The trickle of gold leaving the U.S. threatened to become a flood. So on a Sunday night in August 1971, President Richard Nixon went on television and made a shocking announcement. He unilaterally closed the gold window, severing the dollar's last link to gold. This moment, often called the Nixon Shock, was the quiet revolution that created the financial world we live in today. It was the great untethering. From that day forward, debt became theoretically infinite. Money was no longer anchored to anything tangible. It was now pure fiat currency, backed by nothing more than trust in the government that issued it. Governments and central banks were now free to borrow and print money at will, their only constraint being the confidence of the market. This single decision transformed debt from something finite and difficult into something infinite and easy. With the discipline of gold gone, central banks discovered they had a powerful new tool. They could manipulate interest rates to manage the economy. When growth slowed down, they could lower rates to encourage everyone, governments, corporations, and families to borrow more. And when a crisis inevitably hit, the solution was always the same: create even more debt to patch the hole. Each rescue mission required more leverage, more borrowing, and more risk than the one before it. The pattern was set. We had entered a new era where the solution to a debt problem was always, paradoxically, more debt. The decades that followed the Nixon shock were like a slow-motion avalanche. The pattern was set. Use debt to chase prosperity, then drown when the tide inevitably recedes. The 1980s saw massive expansions of public debt under leaders like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, often justified as necessary for defense spending or economic reform. At the same time, developing countries, particularly in Latin America, were encouraged to borrow heavily from Western banks. When interest rates rose, they couldn't repay, triggering a crisis that set the region back for years. It was the first major test of this new, untethered system, and it revealed a disturbing pattern. The risks were pushed onto the vulnerable, while the lenders were often protected. But this was just a tremor compared to the earthquake that was coming. The 2008 global financial crisis was not, as many still believe, just about a housing bubble. It was about debt layered upon debt, creating a pyramid of leverage so vast and fragile that when one corner crumbled, the entire global structure shook. Here's how it worked in simple terms. It started with mortgages given to people who couldn't really afford them. These individual loans were then bundled together into complex financial products called mortgage-backed securities, MBS, and sold to investors around the world. Then Wall Street created another layer of bets on top of these products called derivatives, things like credit default swaps, CDS. A CDS is essentially an insurance policy on whether a loan will be paid back. But it quickly became a casino where you could buy insurance on your neighbor's house without even owning it, betting on whether it would burn down. This pyramid of promises was amplified by insane levels of leverage. Some investment banks were leveraged 30 to 1, meaning for every dollar of their own money, they had borrowed 30. Economists like Nouriel Roubini at NYU, who was famously nicknamed Dr. Doom, saw this coming. Years before the crash, he warned that this combination of reckless lending and complex derivatives would lead to a catastrophic failure. He was largely ignored, dismissed as a pessimist. But he understood the historical pattern. When the U.S. housing market finally faltered, the pyramid collapsed. Banks failed, global trade froze, and pensions were wiped out. And here we come to the bitter irony, the moment that revealed the true nature of the system. Governments, using taxpayer money, stepped in with trillions of dollars in bailouts. But who did they rescue? Not the homeowners facing foreclosure, not the workers who lost their jobs. They rescued the very institutions that had taken the reckless risks. This introduced a critical and dangerous concept into our financial system: moral hazard. Moral hazard is the idea that if you protect people from the consequences of their actions, they are more likely to behave recklessly in the future. The 2008 bailout sent a clear message to the largest financial players. Heads, you win. Tails, the public loses. You can take enormous risks, and if they pay off, you become incredibly wealthy. If they fail, the government will be there to save you. Since then, the numbers have gone from alarming to completely surreal. Global debt has more than tripled in the last 2 decades, surging past $300 trillion. To put that number in perspective, it's nearly 4 times the size of the entire global economy. It means that for every dollar of value produced in the world, there are nearly $4 of debt claimed against it. This isn't a problem isolated to one country. Look at Japan. Its public debt is over 250% of its GDP. This staggering figure isn't just a statistic, it's a key reason for Japan's lost decades, a long period of economic stagnation and deflation. The debt acts like a gravitational field, suppressing growth and dynamism. In China, a massive debt-fueled construction boom has created incredible growth, but also what many analysts call a ticking time bomb. The recent struggles of property giants like Evergrande revealed the scale of shadow liabilities, hidden debts off the official balance sheets that could threaten their entire economy. And in the United States, the anchor of the whole system, the national debt has surpassed $34 trillion. Trillions are now added every few years with barely a serious debate. The interest payments alone on that debt are now one of the largest items in the federal budget, rivaling what is spent on national defense. Think about that. The world's superpower is now borrowing colossal amounts of money just to pay the interest on the money it has already borrowed. The trap here is that this has led to what sociologists call the financialization of daily life. Your retirement, my retirement, our parents' pensions, they are all now tied up in this system. We are all invested in a stock market that is often fueled by this corporate borrowing and central bank intervention. We become unwilling participants in the casino, hoping the music doesn't stop. The whole system floats on a sea of promises, an illusion that debt can expand forever without consequences. But as history always reminds us, there are always consequences. So if the numbers are this astronomical, why isn't there panic in the streets? Because the true genius of the modern debt system is its invisibility. Debt has become the invisible ink in our social contract, binding future generations to promises they never agreed to. Think about it. When your government runs a massive deficit, no one knocks on your door asking for your share. They simply issue bonds, selling these promises to banks, pension funds, or foreign governments. A tab is quietly opened in your name and in the name of your children. When you swipe a credit card, the moment feels frictionless, detached from the future moment when the bill must be paid. When corporations announce record profits, they are often juiced by borrowed money used to buy back their own stock, which inflates their share price without creating any real value. The entire system is built on leverage, and leverage works just like gravity. It feels completely weightless on the way up and absolutely crushing on the way down. The trap here is as much psychological as it is financial. There's a well-documented concept in behavioral economics called hyperbolic discounting. It's the scientific term for our brain's powerful tendency to prefer a smaller, immediate reward over a larger, delayed one. Politicians are masters at exploiting this. Raising taxes is immediate pain. Cutting popular spending programs is immediate pain. But borrowing money, that feels painless. It allows them to deliver benefits today while pushing the cost onto a future, faceless generation. The illusion works perfectly until it doesn't. That moment of reckoning comes when interest rates rise. This is exactly what we've seen since 2022, as central banks around the world began raising rates to fight the inflation their own policies had helped create. Suddenly, the cost of servicing all that debt surged. Debt is like a sleeping predator. It seems harmless while it rests, but it is deadly when it awakens. Suddenly, the invisible becomes painfully visible. Governments face brutal budget choices. Households see their mortgage payments skyrocket. Corporations that relied on cheap debt to survive suddenly face bankruptcy. And yet, even as the risks flash red, the system continues to sell debt as the path to prosperity. This is the great lie of modern finance. Young people are told to take on tens of thousands in student loans for degrees that may or may not lead to a secure career. In countries like South Korea, the pressure to succeed has led to record levels of household debt as families borrow for education and real estate. In places like Canada and Australia, an entire generation has been told that real estate only goes up, encouraging them to take on once-in-a-lifetime mortgages that will take a lifetime to repay. We are told that deficits don't matter because central banks can always print more. History screams the opposite. So what comes next? If you've studied economic history, the endgame isn't a mystery. In their landmark book, This Time is Different, 8 Centuries of Financial Folly, Economists Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff analyzed centuries of data and came to a stark conclusion. While the details change, the pattern of debt crises is terrifyingly consistent. When a country's debt grows beyond its ability to pay, there are only three ways out. Not 10, not 5. 3. Honest repayment. This involves raising taxes, cutting spending, and using real economic growth to pay down the principal and interest. In our current situation, with debt levels at 3 to 4 times global GDP, this is a mathematical fantasy. No country can grow its way out of this hole. Outright default. This is when a government simply admits it cannot pay and refuses to honor its obligations. History is littered with sovereign defaults, from Argentina to Russia. It's a chaotic and painful process, often leading to being shut out of global markets, social unrest, and a deep economic depression. It's the equivalent of financial surgery without anesthesia. Inflation. This is the third and most common escape route. It is the silent, stealthy way out. A government can't pay its debts, so it prints money to cover the bills. This massive increase in the money supply debases the currency. Prices for everything go up. When prices rise by 10%, the value of your savings falls by 10%. But crucially, the real value of the government's debt also shrinks by 10%. It is a hidden tax on every single person who saves money. So, which path are we on? All signs point to inflation as the chosen path for most of the world's indebted nations. It is politically easier than default and far less painful for politicians than honest repayment. Central bankers may talk tough about fighting it, but debt-laden governments secretly need it. They need the slow erosion of your purchasing power to make their own promises bearable. This means that ordinary citizens, you, will carry the cost. Your savings, your wages, and your future will be slowly drained to preserve a system that has grown too big to fail. It is the oldest trick in the political playbook. And yet people fall for it again and again because inflation creeps up slowly, because the numbers are abstract, and because we are trained to believe that the national debt is someone else's problem. But it's not. It is the shadow that looms over our future. And understanding this isn't just about economics. It's about power. Who gets to print the money? Who borrows? And who gets rescued when it all comes crashing down? Here is the final, crucial insight. Debt is not just economics. It is the language of power. The financial system is not a neutral playing field. It is a structure designed to channel wealth and risk. And when that structure becomes unstable, the rules are often rewritten to protect those at the very top. The bailouts of 2008 were not an anomaly. They were a feature of the system. Banks were bailed out, corporations were restructured, and politicians retired with pensions. Meanwhile, ordinary people lost homes, jobs, and the quiet hope for a stable future. That is why understanding the story of debt is not just an academic exercise. It is an act of financial self-defense. If you don't see the bars of the cage, you will live inside it without ever realizing you're not free. So what can we do? It's easy to hear all this and feel powerless, a small boat on a vast stormy ocean. But that is not the case. The goal isn't to panic or try to predict the exact day the system will reset. The goal is to build resilience, to gain clarity, and to make choices based on awareness, not illusion. Let's summarize the key truths we've uncovered. First, debt is never neutral. Every dollar borrowed has consequences, and it has always been used as a tool to shift power and resources. Second, our modern financial system is an historical anomaly. Since 1971, we have been living in a world of untethered, infinite debt, a system that relies on ever-increasing leverage to function. Third, history shows a clear and repeating pattern. No empire, no nation, and no system has ever escaped a reckoning with unsustainable debt. The cycle always ends in a reset. Recognizing these patterns is the first step. The next is to protect yourself. This doesn't mean burying gold in the backyard or moving to a bunker. It means making intelligent, informed choices to insulate your life from the inevitable shocks to the system. Here's what that looks like in the 21st century. First, prioritize your own financial sovereignty by reducing personal leverage. In a world of systemic debt, the most powerful personal move you can make is to owe as little as possible. High-interest debt, like credit card balances, is a modern form of servitude. Paying it down is one of the highest return investments you can make. Second, build real wealth that isn't entirely dependent on paper promises. This means thoughtful diversification. It's not about betting everything on one asset, but about owning a range of things that hold value across different economic cycles. Yes, this can include assets like precious metals, but it also includes productive land, or even owning a piece of a well-run, low-debt business. The key is to own things that can't be created with a keystroke. Third, and perhaps most importantly, invest in yourself. In an unstable world, your most valuable and resilient asset is your own skill set and earning power. Unlike a currency, your knowledge and abilities cannot be inflated away. As modern work culture shifts, having adaptable skills that are consistently in demand is a form of wealth that provides security no government promise ever could. This is the timeless lesson of history. Debt builds, leaders deny the risk, crises erupt, and societies are forced to reset. The cycle repeats again and again. The only choice you have is whether you face that cycle with your eyes blind or wide awake. If you understand the traps of the system, you can avoid becoming another one of its victims. If you don't, you risk paying for mistakes you never even made. Global debt is not just a number on a spreadsheet. It is the invisible architecture of our world, the shadow that looms over our collective future. And unless we learn from the past, it will break our system in the same way it has broken every empire that came before. Now, I'd love to hear from you. After hearing this history, what's one small step you can take this week to build your own financial resilience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your idea might just inspire someone else. If this video gave you a new perspective, consider subscribing for more insights that history has to offer. Thank you for watching.